Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. So today we are going to give a look to how to land a remise, so a second attack, after a thrust with opposition. So when we are approaching an opponent, first of all we have to understand that with the longsword it is better, far better, to land a thrust with position on the inside if compared to the outside. Now a thrust on the inside line is very good, while a thrust on the outside is pretty bad with the longsword, as we have to cross our hands, and so our opposition tends to be kind of problematic to land. It can be landed in a number of situations, but rarely as the first attack. So that said, it is clear that if we have the option to land a thrust with opposition, it is better to approach the opponent on the inside rather than on the outside. But we have, of course, two different options even in this kind of case, or better, we have a number of options that can be divided into different cases: the low opposition and the side/high opposition. Now, relating a certain kind of case to a certain kind of opposition may seem at the very beginning rather complex to do. But if you apply to a couple of simple concepts I am going to deliver you now, it becomes relatively easy after some training. So you actually have to understand one thing in the end. If your opponent is pointing the weapon more toward your belly or toward your face, this changes, broadly speaking, the opposition that you have to land against that kind of posta longa, so weapon online. Now, if the opponent's weapon is pointed more or less toward your belly or your lower chest, generally speaking, you want to deliver a low opposition, which means that you're not only pushing forward with your weapon, but you're also pushing slightly downward to keep the opponent's weapon at bay. How much? Well, you will discover this with training. Now, when you are landing your thrust with opposition, whatever is the case, you have to know that the opponent has two options, mainly, which are parrying sideways or parrying upward. These are not the only cases, the only scenarios that we have, but are the main one that, generally speaking, we are going to find out. Now, when you are landing the low opposition, the opponent tends, generally speaking, not always again, but generally speaking, to parry high rather than sideways. In this kind of case, it is better to deliver a Sottano to the exposed end as a remise, which means that if you feel that you are in control of the initiative, still in control of the initiative, you can land a Sottano when the opponent is raising their arms to parry. After landing the Sottano, you reach a cover position and you try to move either backward or sideways in a safe position in relation to your opponent. Now, if your opponent instead parries sideways against your low opposition, you have the line free to land a straight fendente at the opponent's head, which means that you are disengaging your weapon from the opponent's parry and then landing your fendente more or less on the same diagonal of your previous opposition, which means that you are doing a very simple motion, pulling back your arms and then pushing forward on the same line with your fendente. Now, in the second case that we are going to analyze, as we said, our opponent has the weapon pointing more or less toward our face or neck, and their hands more or less at their shoulder level. This is the kind of situation in which we have to land our high or sideways kind of opposition. Now, I'm saying side opposition because, yes, it's our high opposition, of course, but our effort is mainly toward the side to keep the opponent's weapon at bay. So it's a side/high opposition. Now, if our thrust land, everything is fine, but if the opponent parries, we have again our two cases. Now, First case, the opponent parries sideways, in this case, because it is the most common one. The second one is again the opponent parries upward. Now, if the opponent parries sideways, our remise will generally be a Zwerchau or a Roverso Fendente or something in between, depending from our training, our style, and the effort that we receive on the blade, so where the opponent is pushing. Because when the opponent is parrying sideways, they can either parry only sideways or sideways and downward, which changes a bit our action. But generally speaking, we can say that if the opponent is parrying sideways, rotating into an attack in the newly formed opening by going right to left, it's a very good idea. Now, if the opponent parries upward instead, we have to deliver a kind of tricky action. We have to charge our Roverso Sottano in a way that I've shown you in the fast Sottano video, which I'm going to link here somewhere. And we have to aim, of course, for the lower openings of the opponent, so either the arms or the chest. Because, of course, the opponent is very high, and so these are the only openings that we have at our disposal in this kind of moment. To better land the action, which as the Zwerchau is a kind of middle range action, we have to enter into distance. But if compared to the Zwerchau, the Sottano do not cover a lot of lines. So to defend ourselves, we have to use positioning. And so the best way to land this kind of action is to move forward and sideways toward our right compared to the opponent. This kind of movement tends to defend ourselves generally a little bit more from the opponent's possible afterblow. Now, as you have seen, pretty simple, 4 cases, 4 solutions. Now, these of course are not the only parries that the opponent may land, but are the most common one, generally speaking. Also, the opponent may answer in a way which doesn't let you land your remise. When you land your remise, you have to land it against an opponent which parries but waits a little before landing the riposte, or do not land the riposte at all. So an opponent which is pretty defensive and has some kind of dead time between the parry and the riposte is the kind of opponent which deserves a remise. Now, instead, if you are facing an opponent which lands very fast parry riposte, it is not a good idea to land your remise. So check it out. If it makes sense, if you fight an opponent which delays a little bit the riposte or do not land the riposte at all, this is the case in which you want to land these kind of actions. Very good, people, we are at the end of this video. Remember to check my Patreon page, link in the description if you want to see more of my content and if you want to support me and the channel. Thanks for watching as always, and see you next time.